Hi, and welcome to our webinar today, where we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and specifically how law firms can turn cybersecurity into a strategic advantage. I'm your host, Caroline Hill. I'm the editor of Legal IT Insider, and I'm joined by a fantastic panel today who are going to be helping me to look at the fact that law firms are facing increasing pressure from clients, regulators, and threat actors. But the forward-thinking firms are flipping the script on cybersecurity. Our partner for this webinar is Arctic Wolf, and we'll be exploring how law firms are moving beyond a compliance checklist to build risk-aware organisations where cybersecurity can be a business enabler. I'm joined by Graham Holt. Many of you will know. He's Regional Vice President of Sales for UK, Ireland and Benelux at Arctic Wolf. Graham's been with the company for just over 4 years, and before that was an enterprise account manager with Databricks, which is an AI and data company. Hi, Graham.
Good morning, Caroline.
Thanks for joining me. And I'm joined by, thanks. I'm Christian Toon, who's founder and chief security strategist at Alverium Associates. Christian was previously the CISO at Pinsent Masons, and he went on to become the head of their international cyber professional services business. He's a well-known commentator and heads the cybersecurity stage at British Legal Technology Forum. Hi, Christian.
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me, both of you. So thanks everybody for joining, and please ask your questions as we go in the chat. The recording will be available. And so we've got a really great chat today. We're going to be looking at how law firms are shifting in their cybersecurity stance, almost from reactive defences to proactive security cultures, and how they're doing that. We'll be looking at sort of doubling down on culture in terms of the role of leadership in aligning cybersecurity strategy with business goals, talking about any sort of practical high impact changes that can reduce cyber risk, and also why continuous exposure management is key to staying ahead as opposed to plugging something in and hoping that it works, and trying to make this webinar really practical. So we'll come to some actionable steps to make security a boardroom level conversation, which I know is a struggle for many of you. So we want to make this very much about Christian and Graham's experience, because they're dealing at the face of things every day. Just before we dive into that, Graham, do you want to just talk a little bit about Arctic Wolf? So it's quite a good time now for you to be drawing on experience and insights. You've released a threat report and a trends report. Just tell us a tiny bit more for anybody who doesn't know Arctic Wolf about the company.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. So, and thank you for the introduction. So Arctic Wolf, if you've not heard of us before, I think we've come to the market with a really interesting proposition. The challenge is mid-market firms typically don't have access to the same budget as the top 10 firms, for example, and they're in a very different place in terms of their security posture. It really does take time and effort to build a 24/7 security operations initiative. And I think part of the challenge, Caroline, is that skilled security engineers are incredibly hard to find. They're even harder to keep hold of. However, mid-market firms and smaller firms and barristers' chambers, they're also very much at risk. You know, they're very much a target for the bad actors. So really our premise and our kind of core belief is, how do we help the smaller organizations have a robust security posture, and how can we partner with them with their security operations, and take them on a journey together and meet them where they are in their security posture today, and make sure that as a partnership we can work with them to improve their position. So a little bit about Arctic Wolf. I mean, the reality is cyber losses continue to increase. The traditional approaches of buying tools and deploying tools, whilst essential, that it's just not working. So there's over 16.6 billion in cybercrime losses last year that we observed. There's over 4,000 organizations in the market selling tools and products, and we believe that taking an operational approach to cybersecurity and helping provide a single vision and broad coverage into firms is really paying off. So a bit about Arctic Wolf: we have over 10,000 customers. We have over 1,000 security engineers. The slightly mind-blowing fact is we see over 8 trillion events per week in our platform, and that's I mentioned that because that's critical. We've got out of those 10,000 customers, we've got hundreds of legal firms of all sizes, so we're getting real world up-to-date intelligence from our existing customers that we feed into the platform. And it's a network effect, essentially. It means that if we see an issue at a law firm in Canada, for example, we can very quickly identify if any of our other hundreds of firms globally will be also impacted. So that enables us to get very, very quickly on top of incidents quickly. On that note, we have over 1,000 incident response engagements per year. These are typically customers who are not Arctic Wolf customers, but they call on us for instant response engagements. But the great thing is we're resonating very well within the legal industry. It's a market that we focus heavily on and invest heavily in. We're delighted that we won for the last 3 years awards at the British Legal Technology Forum for Security Service of the Year, but also IT Security Provider of the Year as well for a couple of years. So that's great. So there's validation within peers that we're looking after legal in a good way, but also Gartner and IDC and others are recognising what we do. And I think the key difference with Arctic Wolf is a platform. It's time to value. Typically, our law firms get up and running with between 30 to 60, 90 days on average. So the time to value is very, very quick. And yeah, it's we're delighted to have such a strong community of referenceable customers in the legal industry who'd be happy to share their experiences with people.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Graham. And Christian, don't want to make you feel left out. Tell us, it's a quite early days for Alvarium, but you're focusing on the legal sector. So just briefly tell us, about the work that you're doing, and you're also obviously working with Arctic Wolf.
Sure. Thanks, Caroline. So I guess without all the industry accolades and the thousands of customers, I've got 3 legal customers at the moment. So Alvarium's Latin for beehive. I've always been motivated by a sense of purpose and working together for a greater good. And after nearly 8 years in the legal sector, one of the things that really stood out was how firms and organizations come together in times of need, but actually should also come together during times of peace and kind of when breaches aren't occurring, that we can perhaps really make a difference. So I formed Alvarium to really kind of try and emphasize and focus on that element within the legal profession, bringing trusted independent advisors together to deal with some of the quite stark and difficult strategic problems we have around cybersecurity, and working with them to ensure that they're getting kind of not only best in class advice, but also get to work with kind of the right and leading technology partners in this space. We've been working now for a number of months, just starting to really scratch the surface on strategic advice and kind of technical or technology mobilization around cybersecurity in particular, but also looking at AI as well. So early days for us, but certainly seeing the need in the market for there and able to kind of present some support for our customers in that space.
It's great. It makes perfect sense as well in terms of the timing. So we're going to dive into the weeds, as I said. We're leveraging both your huge amount of experience in what you're seeing with customers and to bring you some advice as well as in response to that. But just really briefly, so Graham, you've had Arctic Wolf does some great research. You've got a trends report out just as we speak, and that's really interesting. I haven't digested it properly yet, but it shows that AI has become the top concern amongst legal tech and security leaders, which I suppose is no surprise. Perhaps it is a surprise to some. But just tell me really briefly, your trends report 2025. People might be interested. What were briefly the key takeaways from that?
Yeah, really interesting. So every year, as you say, Caroline, we publish a trends report and also in fact, really the key focus is on the trends report. And if you think about the things we're seeing, and this is again for the 10,000 customers we see globally, the interesting thing is 95% of the top 3 cyber incidents account for 95% of all incident response cases we engage with our customers with. So if we can kind of focus in on those 3 cyber incident types, then that covers the majority of all of the IR cases we see. So first, the cases are dominated by ransomware, so that's 44% cases. What's interesting is business email compromise is 27%, and then intrusions make up the third at 24%. And if you think about the nature of data that firms hold, I think the bad actors are following the money. Essentially, it's typically finance, it's insurance, it's legal that are obviously in the bad actors' sites. So if we look at a little bit more detailed analysis, we can see that there's no coincidence. Sort of there's signs of ransomware attacks that stopped prior to detonation. So that's a good sign. That indicates that organizations are improving their detection capabilities. We're also seeing that with 96%, so the vast majority of ransomware cases, they included data theft. So the bad actors are applying what we call double extortion, essentially, where they're stealing data and they're holding the organization to ransom to get that data returned. So I know Christian's top of mind for Christian is backups and the importance of backups to be able to mitigate against that.
Yeah, everyone loves a backup, Graham, and those sort of those data points really resonate, I think, with what the industry is experiencing as well. And there's been those numerous cases where kind of ransomware really has taken the firm or the organisation or chambers offline for a significant period of time. Business email compromise, interestingly, I think second place statistic, but you speak to anyone in the sort of tech and cyber teams across the legal sector, that's a constant game of whack-a-mole. The teams are having to play with that because just so happens the accounts get taken over, and as quickly as they're detected, they need to be kind of closed down, and that has quite far-reaching implications. Certainly if clients or other firms operate a block or allow listing if addresses are known to be compromised, and all of a sudden you've then switched the emails off to some senior partners trying to close out a deal because the addresses within said email chain have been compromised, suddenly brings the focus very much home to roost. So yeah, I would certainly support all of those findings from that trend report.
Yeah, so it's interesting that it's become such a multi-pronged approach, hasn't it? And a multi-pronged conversation. It's become so many more levels to it than just sort of what bit of tech you're using. And I think, so you've said law firms are really shifting from reactive to proactive, that we're going to dive into what that means in terms of culture and leadership. But just talk us through, in basic terms, what it means to move to a proactive approach, perhaps in terms of vulnerability management, etc.
Yeah, I mean, go on, Christian. After you.
No, go on, Graham, please.
I was going to say, so I think for me, part of the challenge is, how do you create a security conscious workforce? That's a key thing. I think cyber risk isn't an IT challenge; it's a business risk issue, and I think it's widely known at managing partner level down, but it's a board level discussion. I think the key thing is creating a workforce where security is top of mind. It's not a kind of being a draconian and being forcing things upon people, but it's just creating a security culture where people feel comfortable that they can effectively be a first line defense for the firm. I think implementing an ongoing schedule of training and education is critical. I think that's really important. I typically find that the standard approach to training doesn't typically work, where it's you've got to spend an hour and a half on a training course, and that happens once a quarter. That doesn't really work. I think ongoing micro learning is critical. But yeah, for me, it's about, security isn't just a IT problem; it's everybody's problem.
Yeah, and I think kind of getting everyone to kind of acknowledge that and go in the same directions, that's where the secret kind of sauce is. And if you look across the demographic firms have, we've probably got one of the hardest employee demographics to try and accomplish that. I mean, our fee earners argue for a living, right? And it's kind of getting them to maybe change practices or adopt new ones when they don't see that as a core priority really takes some going. And productivity is key. And if you're affecting those 6-minute intervals from a billing perspective or client delivery, then you've really got to have some robust reasoning and support as to why that is the case. I joined an organization about 8 years ago now, and we had a 90-minute computer-based training program that was rolled out every 2 years. And I mean, I've practiced security for almost 20 years now, and I think I'd struggle to sit through 90 minutes of security training. So that incremental kind of nudge theory that Graham alluded to is absolutely vital, A, because the science supports it from a cultural change and psychology perspective, but actually it fits so nicely into that kind of 6-minute window of making sure that kind of teams are operating in a agile way, but also getting short bursts of insight and updates on what they should or shouldn't be doing. So culture is the big thing. You need to have that tone from the top. It's cannot just be lip service from the senior team, and making sure that then permeates through the organization, because if there's an inch of wriggle room that the managing or senior partner is not fully behind this, then the rest of the practice groups and teams will use that as reasoning why they don't need to do it. So that is absolutely key.
You've described it as before as people, PowerPoint, and politics, sort of summarising the tone from the top, security culture, and transparency and reporting. So do you want to just talk us through a little bit about what you mean by those three things? And Graham, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure. And it's not to say that there isn't a technology component, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, Graham may disagree, but the technology is the easy bit when it comes to law firms, is sort of, I guess, coined into the 3 Ps: people, PowerPoint, and politics. So people, it's all about the culture and the supporting stakeholders and the positive environment that you can create around security. It doesn't need to be a fear-led capability, and actually you can get a lot of support from people that aren't even in the technology or security teams. I then move on to politics, and of course you don't have politics without that partnership structure. That's the way every firm will operate, notwithstanding the kind of partner seniority that you will see on the face of it, but it's also then understanding the power structures and the decision-making structures that exist across the firm, because that plays a key part in getting anything done. Making sure that they're understood and you can navigate those confidently. And then finally, the PowerPoint element is around transparency and reporting, that security should not be a backroom function with kind of confidentiality all over it, because people need to know what's going on, whether that's from an internal monitoring point of view, that you should be upfront with your employees and your teams, whether they be fee earners or operational staff, about the controls you have and why you have them, but also be clear on the performance of those controls and what you're seeing and how your organization is dealing with all of that, creating that story that you can then share across senior management to junior personnel, so everyone goes with you on that journey.
Yeah. Graham, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, just to echo Christian, really. No additional comments there.
Do you, with the positive environment, do you is it best to try and find, like, I mean, this is a tech thing, but it's like tech/culture thing in the mainstream. You find your like positive adopters, or you find your sort of champions, or you find your people that are going to be really helpful in terms of creating a positive environment. Is that, do you sort of try and, is there a parallel? Do you try and find your sort of your champions within the business, or does it not apply within this area, would you say? That's either of you.
Yeah, I think it very much does apply. The idea behind that your security team will be finite, as will your technology teams. And if you can create a network of champions that really add you the length and breadth of your team and organization, they can be eyes and ears in places where you may not have them. So having that champion model is a great way of stepping this forward from a culture point of view.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I think the other key thing is we somehow try and make it fun. So I'm probably the worst person. If I get allocated some training, it gets put to the back of the pile. We're all incredibly busy, but it doesn't typically work for me. But one key element of our security operations platform is ongoing micro learning. So that's bite-sized chunks, and we've got to make it fun. I mean, we actually purchased an organisation a couple of years back, and they've got a studio in Florida. The quality of the content is incredible, and the whole driver here is to make it bite-sized. So when you see an email drop in, you know it takes 3 or 4 minutes. You can grab a cup of coffee and get it done. But the point is, you can then talk about it internally. You know, did you see the last security awareness training? You know, what did you think? Or did you get caught out by the last phishing simulation? So it's all about getting people to talk and have conversations about security and making it a day-to-day kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think that came away from BLT a little bit from BLTF, isn't it, Christian? You know, you're on the stage obviously for the whole day, and I think it was really interesting how there was some really interesting takeaways from that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, as with most things, whether it be AI, tech, or cyber, there's a real big people component to be considered in not only how the thing is implemented, how it's supported and maintained, but how it affects those individuals. And quite often security or technology changes are just made because the good security book says we need to do things this way, without really too much thinking about the knock-on effects further down the line of those end users. Great one of those is, I guess, as an example, sharing content via email. And if, because it's a good thing to encrypt and protect, et cetera, on all of that, but actually ticks the compliance box from a security point of view, but then adds in another 8 minutes of activity or clicking for the end user, or indeed the sender and receiver of said content, that suddenly then has an impact on client relationships, on efficiencies, etc. So actually you then need to ask yourself the question, well, is that good security thing worth it for the business? And whilst everyone strives to be secure, you can have too much security, and the idea being that you don't want too much that breaks the business or stops it happening. Because if I'm implementing controls and that's slowing the partners down or the fee earners, and they're not able to record time, bill, operate efficiently, then that's an issue for the business. And that's something we need to work through and resolve.
It's got to be practical, isn't it? And I guess so there's a question, much like how firms provide in-house AI training to ensure lawyers are technologically literate to understand client industries. Do you think there should be mandatory cybersecurity training to be security conscious and help clients mitigate breaches?
100%. I mean, a lot of the standards and expectations we have, either from sort of international standards on security or guidance from the SRA or the Information Commissioner's Office or international equivalents, this isn't a UK specific thing, all talk about giving our teams and our people an understanding of what they're facing. We click links as an industry by design, unfortunately. That's how we operate. So how do we get them to distinguish between good stuff and bad stuff? And that's the only way we can really make that happen. Yes, there's a technology response to that, but ultimately our people are our strongest line of defense, and we need to make sure they're equipped. The same reason or the same kind of justifications we put our fee earners through a rigorous training program for qualification to become a lawyer. Maybe not to that extent for cyber, but equally we need to be making available that right experience.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it should be mandatory as well, Caroline, because I think organisations who are approaching legal firms for services expect that to be in place. You know, that's part of a kind of compliance checklist. You know, do you have security awareness training policy in place. And if you don't, then it's probably a big gap there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because people in the chat, obviously, there's still, as an outsider, it's always gobsmacking, you know, that when people see the repercussions in the news the whole time, that there is still this reluctance, but there clearly is, this, you know, this sort of pushback, and actually, particularly amongst senior members of staff, where they're just not doing, when you actually think they've got, we're going to come on towards the end to talk about, you know, the potential impact and repercussions, and how to talk to your board about this. But it's a real challenge, isn't it? Like, and you know, it's a case of, so how do you, I guess, how do you persuade the leaders, you know, that they have to, well, we'll come on to that maybe, I suppose, but the leadership basically needs to be, as you said, taking, you know, creating a tone from the top. But if they're not doing it themselves, then that's going to present a challenge.
Yeah. And I've never found a profession more competitive than the legal one. Yeah. And one of the successes we had was creating a leaderboard of kind of who was doing well in this space. So all of a sudden started to report on the property team, the risk assurance team, the transactional team, business operations, senior leadership, and the completion statistics of those. Obviously, it didn't start as a firm-wide initiative, and it was sort of more of a smaller audience for that data. But we suddenly started to create a bit of competitiveness for the completion of that. And that was the mandatory stuff. So we're talking the bare minimum stuff we need to evidence that we train annually. What we then look to do, and to Michael's kind of challenge there about still trying to get people to watch some fun stuff, is that it might be fun for you or for them, but not for them. So it's actually, well, what are you pushing out to your audience? If it is just that sheep dip fun stuff that you think everyone is going to kind of take advantage of, then I'd probably challenge the fact that they probably won't all have those same humor levels or expectation levels. And quite often you just need to go back to the beginning of this and actually engage your workforce through whatever mediums you have available, and start to ask them about what they're worried about or what they feel they need training on, because they might be quite confident in phishing and spotting malicious links, but actually they need physical security training, or conversely something very different. When at Pinsent Masons, we developed a culture index that allowed us to assess the firm on a number of variables. But when we spoke to our kind of end users about kind of security risks, it was quite interesting, the responses we got back. So engaging your teams to see what it is that they feel they want, but also talk to them about the formats they want. So videos may not be the best medium for them. Yes, there's some great content out there, but actually others may benefit from a traditional postcard type messaging and a pot of jelly beans dropped on their desk. So there's lots of ways that you can build this out, and it's not everyone is going to want the same approach.
Yeah, quite right. Do you, there's a question, I will come to it, thank you. Do you share, when you talked about sharing data and sharing failures, sorry, you talked about sharing data, and in my head I suddenly thought, do you share failures? Like, as in, we create that culture of transparency, you're sharing data, it's not like a back cupboard thing.
Yeah.
Is that a way to sort of help, or not really, if you kind of share successes?
100%. I mean, it also plays a lot to the wider firm culture here. But ultimately, people wouldn't report things because people felt that it's job limiting or it's career limiting, and I can't let people know that I've done this because it will reflect badly on me. But actually turning that around, because what you did want is people to report and put their hand up to go, I've had a suspicious thing and I'm not quite sure. So you can apply some specialist knowledge. And that was a really big turning point, where we got people who had clicked the link at partner level, heads of, manager, associate level, that would then use the kind of monthly communications that we had set up to then talk about that experience. So it wasn't a dirty little secret. It was an acknowledged fact that people click links. Sometimes they're good ones, sometimes they're bad, but allowed us to talk more about the story and the concepts of social engineering, because this gets the best of us. And it's something we can't shy away from on that. So bringing that to the front of the messaging was really important. But you can't do that without a broader kind of purpose-led, transparent kind of business culture. Otherwise, you tend to be kind of just firing this stuff off in the dark.
Okay, well, we'll come to in a minute, perhaps if there are anything, maybe we've sort of covered leadership, but perhaps Graham, I'll come to you in a minute to make sure we've covered anything in terms of the role of leadership. But there's a question, Christian, how has this sector evolved since your time at Pinsent Masons regarding the way in which firms approach cybersecurity concerns for clients?
So I think in the last 7 months, probably not too much as a sector, but if I look back across the sort of 6-7 years, the industry has moved from very much a reactive standpoint to the appointment of more security leaders across law firms, chambers taking more responsibility for their security responsibilities. I think we've moved massively, and that's not to be underestimated, because that is a big shift. Is the industry where it needs to be? Probably still not where it needs to be, but there are certain firms that are really leading the way and breaking out in that, in terms of their approach to the culture element, how their kind of procedures and their technology, policy stack, etc. works, and their third parties that they're working with, because it's very difficult to find that balance between doing everything in-house and actually outsourcing everything. And actually then being able to find those trusted partners can be a real challenge, because the marketplace for cyber is significantly large. Everyone's got a solution for everything, but trying to build out that kind of trusted partner piece can be quite difficult. But there are some firms that are really leading the way with partnerships such as Arctic Wolf that kind of really bring that to bear, because we can't do everything as a firm. So it's important we have that expertise on demand, or those services when we need them.
Yeah, but you can't talk about specific cases, obviously, but there's sort of specific examples, particularly perhaps in the context of good leadership, of where things you've seen be particularly, jump out as, oh, this is the best case, or this is perhaps even the worst case.
Yeah, I mean, I would just talk about the point about leadership and getting buy-in from managing partner level. I mean, the reality is you can't avoid the press we're seeing at the moment on the BBC website, Marks and Spencer's, Co-op, Harrods. I mean, they're all big name breaches and challenges that we're seeing at the moment. In fact, I think it was yesterday, Legal Aid had an issue where data was hacked, and I think data going back to 2010 was downloaded, and that includes all sorts of data, domestic abuse victims, family cases, those facing criminal prosecution, addresses of applicants, dates of birth, national ID numbers. So it's a real issue. So I think those kind of security incidents kind of hit home with managing partners, and I think it's down to reputational damage of firms. I was having a conversation with a regional firm, a family-owned firm. They've been operating for over 100 years. They were fairly brutal. They said, look, if we do get impacted by a significant cyber event, we won't be in business. So I think for that reason, at leadership levels, it's top of mind. It's a board level discussion.
Of course. Do you know what, on the M&S thing, I won't go on about it, but so the Co-op were affected as well, and it really brought it home from a practical day-to-day perspective, because I went in and their shelves were empty, because obviously they couldn't take deliveries, and it's not relevant to our world, but at the same time it really brings home, there's obviously clear parallels. Were you going to say something, Christian?
Yeah, I was just on that point, actually, because you sort of see the market impacts as a consumer, as a sort of industry position, and sort of the effect it's had in stores around the country. For those of us that have been fortunate enough to kind of see or appreciate what's going on behind the scenes, you've got security and technology professionals that are working round the clock to get that back up and running. And teams are being exhausted and stretched like never before. If anyone's had the misfortune of experiencing a ransomware outage to that extreme, it's horrendous. So notwithstanding the kind of immediate impacts of share price and empty shelves, but then there's also the long-term impact of, I guess, the impact it's had on the staff and their ways of working and the teams themselves, that it's just not sustainable. So the mental health becomes a factor. Burnout becomes a factor, retention of staff then also becomes a factor. So you think you might have it all kind of safe and sound now, but when the proverbial does hit that fan, it suddenly puts a completely different lens on things, and it's then where you start looking at those components even more under that microscope. But it's hard to do so because you're firefighting at the time. But I would sort of advocate never waste a good trigger event. Yes, it's the retail sector and kind of sort of supply chain. It's not the legal sector, but there's no reason why it could not happen to us. We are in the supply chain for a lot of big businesses. We have that risk to bear, but also it presents an ever-present kind of issue that reminds us that we're not infallible, and actually this is something that can disrupt our livelihood and our businesses, and we owe a duty of care to the partnership and our teams that depend on the business as well as our clients.
I've interviewed. Sorry, go on.
That's a really good point, Christian, around the human element. It's very often overlooked and not really discussed, but I think that's a really big piece. You know, the ongoing aftermath of an incident. You know, we often talk about the more measurable things. So we have the ability to run business value assessments for firms to talk about, you know, to actually monetize and quantify the risk of a cyber incident to that specific firm, and we do that by using a team of actuaries actually in the US, and we delve into the data, understand the turnover of the firm, but essentially we can come to a point where we can demonstrate the actual business risk and help IT teams present that to the board and actually put it into monetary terms of a business risk that they're faced with cyber. But again, you know, to Christian's point, the thing we don't talk about enough, I don't think, is a human element as well. I think that's a key point.
It's really powerful. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of conveying the need for this and an emotional level that may resonate, even if this fun, you know, tactic doesn't always work. Tell me about so we've covered quite a lot in terms of things that might work as like high impact changes that will significantly reduce risk. But there's things that we haven't talked about, and I know one of those. So you've got Entra ID. We've touched briefly on recovering data, but perhaps we could do a deeper dive into that. Could you just talk through it? You know, perhaps a couple more examples of high impact changes that people should be thinking about.
Yeah, I think for me and for those running sort of a Windows Microsoft shop will be familiar with it with Entra, but identity is probably one of the big areas where quite often is not given the attention it needs. As Graham alluded to, the statistics around business email compromise tends to happen because of, yes, social engineering, but also weak or suboptimal processes around managing identity. Quite often we'd see cases of business email compromise where a UK fee earner is logging in from Peru, and actually, well, there was no travel planned, there was no holiday notifications. So actually, why should that be the case? So looking more broadly at the identity management of both human and machine identities, because a lot of firms now are operating in that hybrid way that it's not just people that the identities need to be kind of covering, or their focus needs to cover. It's also how their application stack are talking to other applications, whether that be within the business or to external parties, and having a clear focus on traditional users within those spaces, but also any accounts that maybe or have an element of privilege to them that means they can do things a little bit more than the traditional accounts. That for me is probably one of the three things, maybe four things that I'd be focusing on.
Yeah, I think so we've got a question. I guess it relates to what you've just said, so I'll ask it immediately. Is that one strategy firms use to draw clients? So this is the value of potential loss you face from a security breach. We can help you establish secure funding for a more secure system.
Yeah, I think client loss is always a factor in there, and reputational damage. In my 8 years, we never lost a client due to poor security measures, but it certainly, we came to escalated matters where it had been reported on the client side that law firm hadn't done a particular thing, or wasn't doing it in the way that they wanted it done. So from a reputation point of view, it certainly kind of got escalated on both sides. But then that just helped bringing focus to what we needed to do to remediate it. But that again is the reactive step of saying, well, we'll wait for the client to come and tell us what we're not doing or how we should do things. What we were able to do is actually turn that on its head and take security assurance into the client conversation, both at the pitch early stage of just trying to win that work, or in the regular kind of check-ins and reviews that, the teams would have, that actually we were taking to them what we were doing and how we were doing it, as opposed to waiting to be audited. So I think if that's what the question was around, then yes, it can be used, but perhaps more on a reputational damage point of view. Yes, you may throw in the total contract value as a financial measure, but in my experience, the impacts there were more reputational than financial.
Graham, can I ask you, so we're at such an interesting time in terms of firms trying to innovate quickly. I've been writing about the legal sector for many more years than I care to admit, because I'm very young. But I've never seen, I've been writing about legal tech for years. You two have been involved in tech for much longer than that, and I've never seen so much change or rush to innovate. Is that and clients are what perhaps reminded me is clients are a big part of that as well. Clients are putting firms under pressure to innovate. We want to show our clients how efficient we're becoming, but that presents its own challenges, doesn't it, in terms of cybersecurity? What are your sort of observations around that, Graham?
You're right. I mean, there's a huge amount of innovation. I think there's a rapid adoption of new technologies and tools. AI, we've talked about before. I think AI is quite interesting. I think security leaders are taking threats associated with AI pretty seriously. I mean, the thing to remember, AI is a tool by which the threats are being delivered and enhanced, but AI itself is not the threat. But I think as people adopt new technologies quickly, I mean, if you think about the transition and what we've seen since COVID, the whole kind of concept of a secure kind of environment is completely blown away. People are working from coffee shops, people are working from home, people are working on multiple different devices. So yeah, it's a challenging time. It certainly has been for the last 4 years. I think to keep on top of this, I mean, in my opinion, 24/7 is an absolute must in terms of monitoring the environment. The key thing is also vulnerability management, so getting ahead of a curve and making sure that vulnerabilities that do exist can be picked up on very, very quickly. So I think ongoing external and internal vulnerability scans, I think that's critical. And again, the challenge with vulnerabilities, as I'm sure Christian will confirm, is that there's so many of them. It's all about prioritizing the top vulnerabilities. So if you can find a security operations partner that can work with you to say, I tell you what, this week we've got to focus on these top 10 vulnerabilities, because from what we see from our other firms globally, it might not be high on a vulnerability level, but we've identified it as a critical thing that needs to be looked at, and we can help prioritize those vulnerabilities. And that means the likelihood of an incident happening in the first place is much more reduced. So I think vulnerability management is a key kind of element to that. But yeah, it's difficult to keep track on the fast pace of innovation within firms.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of sort of key tips then for coming back to the absolute key to all of this, making it, we talked about tone from the top, and we talked about making it a boardroom level conversation. So for people to have some takeaways in terms of how practical tips as to how they may do that, what would be some of your takeaways? Would it be talking about the potential financial impact, and what do you see working? You've both been dealing with this from the inside. What do you see working for people to help people?
Yeah, so I think for me there's 5 things, and everything we do for security, both in and outside the firm, needs to be tied to risk and risk management. That really does set the tolerance and indeed the tone of how much or indeed how little the firm is going to do to deal with this as an operational challenge. But it also helps you then tie back your response to dealing with this to the business objectives. Um, Quite bluntly as well, it covers your ass to say that we've tried, the business doesn't want to do that. It's going to operate at this level, and fine, we've got a statement that says that. So it gives you that element of protection as well. So definitely risk management. Identity, as I've already mentioned, for the same reasons, that kind of it's where a lot of the pain points tends to happen. And being clear as to what the governance regime over that looks like and the controls. Backup, because the bad thing will happen. Can you be confident that you're going to recover not just your data, your applications and dependent services on that? Quite often people just focus on the data or the applications, but then completely forget the sort of the identity platform to stitch all that together. So being clear that you understand what those dependencies are, that it's tested, and that actually they can't get into it. One of the sad tactics they have as attackers is getting into backups and deleting them or compromising them. So when you go to backup and restore, you've just restored a bad version of the network that they've still got access to. So it's all of these things to focus on. Culture, I think we've done significantly during our time, but that's a big part there. And that vulnerability management, as Graham's mentioned. So for me, they're my 5 things.
Those are your key, sort of key top key takeaways generally, and then so that's great, thank you. And then in terms of conveying to the leaders, if we were to get off this call and then go and approach the board and say, right, chief executive, managing partner, these are the reasons why we need to change this to to make this more of a boardroom conversation, or to make this more effective. So you perhaps talk about the cost to them in terms of their own, you make it a personal conversation, I imagine, in terms of like the personal impact on them, and then perhaps also a reputational damage, I would imagine. Is that right, in terms of making sure that after that going forward, this is that we're not having the examples that we've had in the chat where senior members aren't engaging?
Yeah, exactly that. Sorry,
I've got a couple of points just to add to Christian's previous points. I think in terms of stuff you can do, which is easy, I think maintain logs, audit logs. I think that's critical, just to make sure that you've got a historic record. I mean, we offer log retention up to 10 years, but typically for compliance, it's a minimum of 12 months. So I think log retention is critical. I think also developing a detailed incident response plan, I think that's critical as well. It's not expensive to do, it's very cost effective, but you need to have a documented plan, and you need to practice that plan. In the event of an incident, you have it doesn't come as a surprise. You know where things are documented. You've got an IR plan that's off your local servers, because as Christian mentioned, if that gets compromised, then you don't have a copy of that either. So, but it's the key point is it's practicing that incident response plan, and but most importantly, having one in the first place.
Yeah, but that's not to persuade your chief executive, is it? Or is that
no,
just your...
No, that's just to kind of follow on from Christian's points.
Sure,
So,
like, how do we persuade our chief executive? Do we talk about how much it's going to cost them, or how much they're going to give them examples? Do we talk about the SRA? Do we talk about the...
I think there's a sort of trident approach here. If you're sitting down with a managing partner, CEO, senior partner, is firstly that regulatory position that the SRA has the rights to withdraw said license and stop the firm practicing in the most extreme of cases. If you don't have the right things in place, that yes, that is the penultimate response, and that's the thing you'd really be worried about, because that's not only your livelihood, that's your partner's livelihood as well as your firm's. You've then got the financial impact that we've touched on through today. In addition to the trend report, Verizon do a great cost of the data breach annual report that sort of produces data that sort of gives you some estimates on what this sort of stuff costs. But because we're a time and materials industry, it's quite easy to suddenly say, well, okay, let's take your fee earners out for 6 weeks. What's the financial cost of that to the business? So the data points within the organization are quite easy to get to. And the third element after finance is then client and reputation, is that we pride ourselves so much on our ability to deliver high quality legal advice and legal work that actually if we suddenly don't have that, or that is tarnished, does that mean clients go elsewhere? Does that mean we're not able to deliver because our just systems aren't working? Will clients then trust us in the future? Now, we're not necessarily going to disappear as a result of a cyber breach. I mean, DLA, a great case in point, they've been able to recover and sort of told a really good story behind that and the processes and changes that have happened there. But it is very much how are you going to recover from that? You might have critical clients going to trial and actually you're just not able to support them. So the implications of that and what does that mean? So the client angle is definitely something that needs to be in there because it's how a lot of firms will operate.
Yeah, I interviewed Daniel Pollock about a DLA, and it still gives me chills. He spoke at a conference I hosted years and years ago, and you could hear a pin drop when he talked in great detail through what happened. And it still gives me chills thinking about it. Graham.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, you have to articulate at board level the current position of a firm in terms of its security posture. So again, part of a security operations platform, we offer a cyber resiliency assessment, and that basically draws a line in the sand and says, look, this is where you are today. This is where the gaps are. And I think that's one key part. And then we articulate how we can partner to improve that security posture as a journey through the engagement with us. That's one point, and the second one is really the business value assessment to help put it into monetary terms. You know, that tends to get listened to at a managing partner level. If we can help identify and quantify business risk, then that's a key conversation to have at board level. So we find that typically helps. What's interesting is that when we don't have those kind of conversations at managing partner level, sometimes it's difficult to gain funding and budgetary approval to get these kind of initiatives through. But when it's at board level and it's got that kind of buy-in from a board, it's I think people can quickly see that it's a worthwhile investment.
This is a bit of a plug for Arctic Wolf, but I was interested in one particular instance. You said that by using you, it cancelled out the cost of the cyber insurance. Is that right? I know we can't talk for lots of different examples, but that was interesting.
Yeah, we had a really interesting conversation with a CIO of a top 20 firm who came across a global firm and said that the investment that they'd made in Arctic Wolf was almost cost neutral. It wasn't quite cost neutral, but the reason it was cost neutral almost was because the reduction in their cyber insurance premium was so significant. It helped fund the investment in having a 24/7 security operations partner that they could work with. So two positive outcomes for the firm. First of all, their security posture is actually getting better as due to that investment. And secondly, they're giving less money to the cyber insurers. The cyber insurance company, by the way, are equally happy because their risk profile has dropped dramatically, hence a drop in premium.
Yeah, I just want to finish up just briefly for both of you. So we started off with the premise or with the question, is cybersecurity a business enabler? Would you say it is? I think, Graham, what you suggested just sort of alluded to that, but is cybersecurity a business enabler?
I think personally it is, because if you don't have these security controls in place and you can't demonstrate to organizations who are looking to use your services that you have a strong posture of cybersecurity, then it could result in reduced revenues for the firm. So completely agree.
Yeah, I think when it's framed like that, 100%. But sadly, more over than not, it's just seen as the no department. It's the restriction thing. It's the compliance, and actually, it's just a thing that should happen behind the scenes. And that's so wrong on so many levels. But unfortunately, it's kind of where the industry has kind of grown from. That's kind of how it was seen previously. And I think in some firms, it is still seen a little bit like that. I mean, some of the comments in the chat have been like trying to get more buy-in support with funding because the senior teams just aren't getting it. And unfortunately, you can do all the things you can to try and kind of advocate for it and see it as a strategic advantage. But the reality may be that it's just the firm you're at is not wanting to take it any further. But kind of hope that nothing bad happened, but you do see the differentiation, even if it's on things just like customer engagement. So actually the security posture maybe stays the same, nothing bad happens, equally nothing good happens. It's the conundrum of cybersecurity. But what we have seen in Bennett where it does benefit is there any simple things like customer feedback. Supply chain used to be a real kind of difficult area for many firms of dealing with those questionnaires and the client audits, etc. But if you can put a customer lens on cybersecurity in that setting, all of a sudden the managing partner or relationship partners are getting complimentary emails from clients to say how good this is. And that's a really positive thing. So you can chalk that one up as well. So as with most things in security, to answer your question, it kind of depends. We'd love to get to the position where Graham's described, but I think we still are teetering on a bit of a knife edge as a sector.
Yeah, okay. Well, it seems like there's a lot of food for thought there, and very much moved from a backroom conversation to something that needs to be out in the open. It's great we're having these types of conversations. Seems like for those firms who are creating those cultural differences, it's something that they can be sharing with clients in terms of the messaging, and sort of sharing that there's a culture of transparency and end-to-end cybersecurity efforts. So I'm really grateful for your time. I'm really grateful to people in the chat. And thank you so much for your questions. Obviously, we will be sharing this recording, and if you've got any follow-up questions, we'll be sharing contact details as well. But thank you so much for your time, everybody. It's been really great chatting with you both.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having
Caroline.
us.
We enjoyed it. We talked a lot about the threat report. We obviously have that available, so if anybody would like to see a copy, we'd be more than happy to share that detail as well.
And also the trends report, which is available.
And the trends report that came out today.
Indeed. Out today, hot off the press. All right, great. Thank you so much for your time.
Everyone.
Great stuff.
Thanks.
All the best.
Thank you. Bye.